market did not sense history arriving because history rarely announces itself. It waits until the lamps are dim, the coins counted twice, and everyone is already thinking about home. Many listen quietly here, night after night. If this calm travels with you, you may stay. Subscribing keeps this silence alive. When the market didn't know it was history. The medieval marketplace at night was never designed to impress anyone who arrived late. By the time the sun slipped behind roofs and chimneys, the square was already tired. Wooden stalls leaned inward, as if listening to their own creaks. Canvas awnings sagged, no longer pulled tight for customers who had mostly gone. What remained was not spectacle, but residue, the slow aftertaste of a day that had been practical rather than important. This was Europe somewhere between the 11th and 13th centuries, although nobody present would have bothered to define it so precisely. Time was not counted in centuries here. It was counted in daylight, in bell sounds, in how long bread stayed warm when wrapped in cloth. The marketplace existed because people needed to exchange things before dark, not because they wished to be remembered by scholars or narrated by voices centuries later. History, if it was nearby at all, was doing a very poor job of making itself noticeable. The sellers who lingered were not dreamers. They were people with remaining goods and an instinct for not carrying weight home unnecessarily. Vegetables that had not sold were rearranged as if order itself might convince someone to buy. Fishmongers rinsed boards even though the smell would never fully leave. Bakers wrapped loaves that were no longer fresh, but still useful. There was a quiet irony to the scene. These people were managing small calculations that mattered deeply to them, while unknowingly supplying material for grand narratives about medieval economies and urban life. Knowledge that trusted tomorrow. No one in Alexandria went to bed worried that knowledge might vanish overnight. That anxiety belongs to us, not to them. It is a modern fear shaped by hard drives, forgotten passwords, and the quiet panic of systems that only work when constantly refreshed. Alexandria trusted something far less dramatic. It trusted repetition. The city did not treat knowledge as a fragile miracle that needed guarding every hour of the night. It treated it like furniture, heavy, familiar, unlikely to get up and leave. A scroll left on a shelf was not abandoned. It was resting, like a tool set down at the end of a long day, expected to be picked up again tomorrow without ceremony or fear. This confidence did not come from arrogance. It came from routine. Libraries opened because libraries had always opened. Teachers taught because teaching was scheduled, not heroic. Readers returned because reading was part of the day, the same way water was drawn and bread was bought. Alexandria did not ask knowledge to prove its importance every morning. That alone saved an enormous amount of energy. The library was not imagined as a single glowing room of eternal brilliance. It functioned more like a workplace with very good acoustics. Quiet but not sacred. Orderly but not theatrical. People arrived with dust on their sandals and ordinary problems on their minds. They copied texts, not because they felt history watching, but because copying was the task assigned before lunch. There is something deeply unromantic about that, and deeply effective. Modern culture likes the idea that knowledge survives only through constant urgency. Alexandria believed the opposite. That knowledge survived because no one panicked about it. Scrolls were recopied because the calendar said so. Catalogs were maintained because disorganization was inconvenient. Errors were corrected because mistakes were annoying, not because civilization was at stake. This is how most important things actually endure, by being boring enough to repeat. The scholars of Alexandria did not stay awake all night fearing loss. They went home. They slept. They trusted that the system would still be there in the morning. And it usually was. This trust shaped the architecture of learning itself. Spaces were built not for spectacle, but for return. Wide rooms, predictable layouts, familiar paths between shelves. Nothing about the design suggested a final moment. Everything suggested continuity. A reader did not feel the pressure to finish a text before disaster arrived. There was no disaster scheduled, only dinner. The city assumed tomorrow would come, which, statistically speaking, was a very reasonable assumption. Even the act of copying texts reflected this calm confidence. Copies were made slowly, deliberately, with margins wide enough for future notes. That detail matters. A civilization afraid of losing knowledge copies in haste. Alexandria copied as if there would be time to fix mistakes later, because there usually was. This created a subtle but powerful intellectual atmosphere. Ideas were not frozen in fear. They were allowed to remain incomplete. A theory could be wrong today and corrected next year. A translation could improve over decades. No one demanded instant perfection. The city understood something we often forget. Knowledge is not a monument. It is a process that assumes patience. Even disagreement felt different under this mindset. Debate did not need to end tonight. Arguments could be paused. You could disagree with someone and still expect to see them tomorrow, which tends to lower the temperature of most conversations. Alexandria's intellectual life was shaped less by brilliance than by scheduling. Lectures happened because rooms were reserved. Research continued because stipends were renewed. This is not the story people like to tell. It lacks flames and final acts. But it explains more than most myths ever could. The city's confidence in tomorrow also shaped what it did not do. It did not chase every new idea in a frenzy. It did not archive out of desperation. Selection was possible because time felt abundant. When knowledge trusts tomorrow, it can afford to be selective. When it fears tomorrow, it hoards. Alexandria trusted enough to choose. And perhaps the quietest irony of all is this. The city that trusted tomorrow so completely is remembered today largely through the lens of loss. We imagine it constantly on the brink. They did not. They lived as if continuity were normal, which for a long time it was. The people working in Alexandria did not feel like guardians of eternity. They felt like employees. And that may have been the most radical thing of all. Because systems run by people who believe their work will continue tomorrow tend to be calmer, steadier, and strangely resilient. No one stayed late to save civilization. They left on time so they could return. Knowledge rested at night not because it was hidden or protected, but because it was trusted. Trusted to remain. Trusted to wait. Trusted to be useful again in the morning. And when the lamps were extinguished, nothing dramatic happened. Scrolls did not whisper. Walls did not tremble. The building simply became quiet, which is often how the most important things survive. Buyers moved differently now. In the evening, they did not browse. They approached with purpose, eyes lowered, voices shortened. A woman buying onions at dusk was not performing culture. She was negotiating dinner and tomorrow morning. A man checking the weight of grain did not imagine future historians praising his discernment. He was simply tired and wanted to go home before the streets grew darker and the air colder. The market itself seemed to sense the change. During the day it was expansive, noisy, argumentative. At night it contracted. Sounds carried farther but meant less. A dropped coin echoed longer than a raised voice. Wood scraping stone replaced shouting. Footsteps gained importance. Silence became a participant rather than an absence. There is a temptation to imagine medieval life as constantly dramatic, full of danger and spectacle, as if every night risked catastrophe. The marketplace after sunset quietly resists that idea. Nothing exceptional is happening here. That is precisely the point. The survival of a society depends less on its moments of excitement than on its ability to end an ordinary day without incident. Lantern light did not flood the square. It punctuated it. Pools of amber hovered over hands and faces, leaving the rest to shadow. Light was not a promise of safety, but a tool of navigation. It helped people avoid stepping on refuse or into each other. Darkness was not feared so much as respected. It marked boundaries more effectively than walls. People knew where not to linger simply by how little light reached there. Some stalls were already closed, their owners gone. Others remained half open, caught between effort and surrender. Closing a stall was a small ritual performed without ceremony. Cloth was folded, ropes loosened, crates stacked. The movements were practiced and unremarkable, which is another way of saying they were successful. Systems that work rarely announce themselves. The marketplace did not belong entirely to commerce anymore. It shifted toward maintenance. Sweepers gathered debris that daylight shoppers never noticed. Children apprenticed to merchants waited to be told where to sleep, often right there beneath the counter they had guarded all day. Guards walked not with urgency but with routine, their presence more symbolic than confrontational. Authority at night functioned best when it did not need to speak. There is mild humor in how seriously modern observers sometimes take these spaces. The medieval market was not trying to represent economic theory or social hierarchy. It was attempting something far more ambitious and far less glamorous. It was trying to make tomorrow possible without making tonight difficult. The true achievement was not profit but continuity. Smells became more honest as crowds thinned. Waste, damp wood, cooked food gone cold, animals that had been patient too long. During the day, these were masked by movement and noise. At night, they asserted themselves. The city revealed what it was made of when nobody was trying to sell anything. Weather mattered more now. A breeze could empty a square faster than a decree. Cold reminded people that stone held chill better than warmth. This was not philosophical. It was physical knowledge learned repeatedly and without reflection. Medieval people did not romanticize discomfort. They organized their lives around avoiding it when possible. What makes this moment historically interesting is not what happens, but what does not. There is no speech, no decree, no turning point. The market simply winds down. And yet this ending, repeated hundreds of times a year, is what allowed medieval cities to exist at all. A society capable of stopping for the night without falling apart has already solved most of its problems. From a distance, it might seem disappointing. Where are the dramatic confrontations, the decisive exchanges, the moments that define an age? They are absent because they are unnecessary. The market has already done its work. Goods have moved. Needs have been met imperfectly, but sufficiently. Tomorrow will offer another chance. History tends to reward noise. It remembers proclamations and conflicts. It is less attentive to evenings that conclude as planned. But if history were honest, it would admit that its favorite moments depend entirely on nights like this one. Nights when nothing happens, and because of that, everything continues. The people leaving the market did not feel triumphant. They felt done. That sensation, the quiet satisfaction of finishing a day that did not go wrong, is rarely recorded. It is also one of the most stable foundations any civilization has ever known. Somewhere at the edge of the square, a lantern is extinguished. Not dramatically, simply because it is no longer needed. The market recedes into shadow, not as a symbol, but as a practical response to the hour. And in that small, uncelebrated act, medieval urban life reveals its greatest strength. It knew when to stop. The last sails before dark. As the light begins to thin rather than vanish, the marketplace enters its most honest phase, a moment when trade stops pretending to be enthusiastic and admits it is simply tired, because the final transactions of the day are never about ambition or growth, but about relief, about letting go of what remains, so bodies and minds can move on to something quieter and closer to rest. Prices soften not because generosity has suddenly appeared, but because time has become more expensive than profit, and the merchant knows with a clarity sharpened by long practice that an unsold cabbage weighs more heavily at night than a slightly smaller purse, so a few coins are quietly surrendered in exchange for the luxury of not carrying tomorrow's problem home. Voices follow the same logic. They lower not out of politeness, but because effort is rationed. Bargaining requires energy, posture, alertness, and the will to perform disagreement. And as the sky dims, both buyer and seller recognize that the performance costs more than it is worth. The evening transaction is less a contest and more a mutual nod, an agreement to end the day without unnecessary friction. Fresh goods feel the pressure first. Anything that can rot becomes urgent, and urgency, despite what heroic stories might suggest, does not make people dramatic. It makes them efficient. Fish are offered with fewer words. Greens are bundled with less concern for symmetry. Bread that was proudly displayed hours earlier is now wrapped quickly, sold at a discount that is never announced, but always understood. Dry goods enjoy a different fate. Cloth, grain, salt, tools, items that do not fear the night are treated with patience rather than panic. They are covered carefully, not hidden, because the merchant expects to see them again tomorrow. Canvas is drawn across stalls like a blanket rather than a barrier. The act is calm, practiced, and faintly reassuring, suggesting a confidence in continuity that does not require optimism. Coins move differently now. During the day, they change hands with speed, clinking and flashing in brief moments of attention. At dusk, they are counted slowly, not because people are suddenly suspicious, but because haste has lost its appeal. Fingers linger on metal, tallies are checked twice. The day's arithmetic is completed with the seriousness of a ritual that ensures the night will be peaceful. There is a quiet irony in this careful counting, because the sums involved are rarely large, yet they carry the weight of meals, rent, and tomorrow's ability to return to the same square and repeat the process. Economies are often described in sweeping terms, but here they exist as a handful of coins and a decision about whether one more sale is worth the cold. The market itself seems to exhale, its earlier tension dissolves, replaced by a looser arrangement of bodies and objects. Stalls lean inward, spaces open where crowds once pressed. The square feels larger and less demanding, as if it has stopped asking to be impressed and is content simply to exist until morning. Buyers sense this shift instinctively. They approach with fewer questions. They accept imperfections. A carrot bent the wrong way is no longer an insult. A loaf that cooled too much is still a loaf. Evening teaches acceptance, not through philosophy, but through hunger and fatigue. There is mild humor in how predictable this transformation is. Everyone involved understands the rules, yet no one states them. The merchant will not openly admit that the price is lower because the sun is setting, and the buyer will not point out that the leverage belongs to the clock rather than the quality of the goods. Both participate in a shared fiction of fairness that allows the exchange to end gracefully. This is not generosity. It is cooperation born of exhaustion. Medieval marketplaces did not rely on idealism to function. They relied on the recognition that tomorrow arrives more easily if tonight ends without resentment. Sounds change accordingly. The sharp calls advertising wares fade, replaced by quieter confirmations. Yes, that will do. No, that is enough. A single coin sliding across wood sounds louder now than it did at noon. The market listens to itself in the evening. Smells also reorganize. Freshness gives way to honesty. The scent of produce blends with damp wood, animal hair, and the faint metallic note of money handled too long. These are not unpleasant smells. They are unadorned. They belong to work that has been done rather than promised. The light plays a subtle role in shaping behavior. Lanterns are positioned to illuminate hands rather than faces. Trust is extended cautiously, but not fearfully. Darkness narrows focus. It discourages browsing and encourages completion. The day's chaos resolves into a series of small conclusions. Merchants know better than to push too hard at this hour. Aggression in the evening feels misplaced, almost rude, like raising one's voice in a room where everyone has already agreed to leave. Experience has taught them that forcing a sale now often costs more in reputation than it gains in coin. Some sellers linger longer than others, not out of hope, but out of calculation. They weigh the value of one more customer against the value of being home before full dark. This calculation rarely favors ambition. Medieval economic life, contrary to modern myth, often preferred stability over expansion. What is remarkable is how little resentment appears in this final phase. The market does not feel cheated by the day. It feels concluded. There is satisfaction in closure that no successful bargain can replace. As the last fresh goods disappear and dry wares are secured, the square settles into a temporary neutrality. It is no longer a place of persuasion, it is a place of transition. People pass through it rather than linger within it. This moment reveals something essential about medieval urban life. Trade was not endless, it had edges. Those edges were respected not because of regulation alone, but because bodies demanded them. Hunger, cold, and fatigue enforced limits more effectively than rules ever could. From a historical distance, it might be tempting to read significance into every exchange, to imagine that each softened price reflects broader economic pressures or social change. Sometimes it does, often it does not. Sometimes it simply reflects the fact that the seller wants to sit down. And yet these small decisions accumulate. A market that learns to soften at dusk learns how to survive. It avoids conflict. It preserves relationships. It ensures that tomorrow begins with familiarity rather than bitterness. As darkness approaches fully, the last sales conclude without ceremony. No one marks the moment when bargaining ends. It simply becomes inappropriate, like continuing a conversation after the listener has clearly stopped listening. The square does not empty all at once. It thins. Gaps appear between people. The market's breathing slows. What remains is not silence, but a different rhythm, one that belongs to closing rather than opening. In this way, the final transactions of the day are less about money than about timing. They teach patience without instruction and restraint without moralizing. They demonstrate that an economy, like a body, functions best when it knows when to stop. By the time true night arrives, the market has already done the hardest part. It has let go, and in doing so, it prepares itself quietly and without ambition to begin again. Sounds that replace the crowd. When voices begin to fade, they do not leave behind silence so much as they reveal what had been waiting underneath all along, because the medieval marketplace never truly stops speaking. It merely changes its language. And as the human volume lowers, the materials finally gain permission to be heard. During the day, the market is loud in a way that feels intentional, almost performative, as if every sound is competing for attention and trying to justify its existence. But at night, the soundscape becomes accidental and therefore more truthful, made not of announcements but of consequences, of objects completing the tasks they were assigned hours earlier. Wood dragging across stone is one of the first voices to emerge. It is not sharp, but it is persistent, a rough conversation between two surfaces that have known each other for centuries. Stall legs scrape as they are shifted. Crates slide reluctantly toward walls. Carts protest as they are turned the wrong way after a long day of cooperation. These sounds do not hurry. They do not persuade. They simply report that weight is being moved by tired arms. There is something mildly ironic in how much effort is required to undo the day. Opening the market feels energetic and optimistic, while closing it requires patience and negotiation with gravity. Wood resists being lifted after sunset, as if it too believes the day should already be over. The market does not argue, it adjusts. Ropes begin to speak next. They creak as they are loosened, rub softly against posts, tighten once more with a tone that suggests resignation rather than tension. Ropes at night are no longer instruments of display. They are tools of containment. They keep cloth in place, hold bundles together, remind the wind that this space is not yet abandoned. The rope's sound is subtle, easy to miss, but once heard, it becomes difficult to ignore because it carries intention without urgency. A rope does not expect applause, it expects tomorrow. Its voice is that of preparation rather than performance. Farther away, hooves announce departure. Not dramatically, not in a hurry, but with the steady rhythm of someone who has already decided that the day is complete. The sound of a horse leaving the square grows softer with distance, each step carrying away a fragment of daytime authority. Trade moves out, travel resumes, the market releases what it borrowed. What is striking is how these sounds do not overlap chaotically. They take turns, as if the market has agreed on a quieter order. A cart shifts, then pauses. A rope tightens, then rests. Hooves pass, then vanish. The absence of voices creates space for sequence. This is when the market becomes audible in a new way. Without human speech dominating the air, the environment reveals how much work it has been doing unnoticed. Stone absorbs sound differently when it is not constantly interrupted. Wood resonates more honestly when it is not drowned out by bargaining. During the day, language governs the space. Words argue, persuade, exaggerate, soften. At night, language withdraws, and material reality resumes authority. Wood sounds like wood, rope sounds like rope, metal sounds tired. The market stops pretending that words are the primary drivers of its existence. There is a gentle humor in this reversal. All day long, people speak as if their intentions shape the world, and then, once they grow quiet, the world continues shaping itself with or without their commentary. The marketplace does not require narration to function. It only tolerates it. These nighttime sounds also travel farther. Without crowds to absorb them, a single movement carries across the square. Someone closing a stall on one side can be heard clearly on the other, not because the act is loud, but because nothing is competing with it. The market listens to itself, finishing. This listening creates awareness. People become more careful, not out of fear, but out of courtesy. A dropped crate feels intrusive. A careless kick echoes longer than intended. Noise becomes noticeable and therefore moderated. The crowd once regulated sound by overwhelming it. Now restraint does the work. As the human presence thins, the marketplace begins to sound older. The materials remind everyone that they existed before this particular day and will remain after it. Stone does not care what was sold. It only registers pressure and release. Wood does not remember prices. It remembers weight. This shift has consequences for behavior. People move more deliberately. They step around obstacles rather than over them. They avoid sudden gestures. The night does not encourage efficiency. It encourages caution. In this quieter soundscape, even small movements take on meaning. A footstep suggests direction. A cough suggests presence. The absence of sound suggests either departure or rest. The market becomes legible in a way it never was at noon. There is no attempt to control this transformation. No rule declares that voices must lower. It happens naturally, guided by fatigue and diminishing light. The market obeys the body before it obeys authority. One might expect this reduction in sound to feel empty, but it does not. It feels settled. The space retains activity without agitation. The work continues, just without commentary. The market is still alive. It is simply not advertising itself. The difference between daytime and nighttime sound reveals something fundamental about medieval urban life. Much of its order depended not on constant supervision, but on shared rhythms. People knew when to speak and when to let materials take over. There is also a lesson in humility embedded here. Human voices dominate history because they leave records, but they are not the only sounds that matter. The creak of wood and the scrape of stone carried the weight of continuity long before anyone thought to write about them. As night deepens, the soundscape continues to simplify. Fewer movements occur, longer pauses appear between them. Eventually, the market settles into a state where sound is occasional rather than continuous. At this point, the absence of voices no longer feels like loss. It feels appropriate. The market has said what it needed to say during the day. At night, it allows the materials to finish the sentence. The final impression is not silence, but balance. A place that knows how to quiet itself without instruction is a place that understands its own limits. The medieval marketplace did not fear this transition. It relied on it. By letting sound shift from speech to substance, the market protected itself from exhaustion. It conserved energy. It prepared the ground for morning. And in doing so, it demonstrated a form of intelligence rarely celebrated, the intelligence of knowing when to stop talking and let the world speak for itself. Who still stays when trade is over? When trade finishes, the marketplace does not empty so much as it changes its idea of who belongs, because the end of commerce is not the end of presence. It is merely a rearrangement of roles, quieter ones, less celebrated ones, carried out by people who were never meant to be noticed in the first place. The guard is usually the most visible of those who remain, though visible is a relative term in the half-light of evening. He does not stand dramatically at the center of the square. He moves along its edges, pausing where shadows gather, adjusting his pace to the sounds that replaced voices. His purpose is not heroism. It is reassurance through routine. He walks the same path each night, not because danger demands it, but because repetition does. There is a faint irony in how history often imagines guards as defenders against catastrophe, when most of their labor consisted of preventing boredom from turning into disorder. The guard's success is measured in nothing happening, which makes him exceptionally good at being forgotten. If he does his job well, there is no story to tell. Nearby, someone sweeps. The cleaner works with a rhythm that does not seek attention. Debris gathered during the day is now acknowledged. Vegetable leaves, straw, fragments of packaging, all the evidence of commerce the daylight ignored in its enthusiasm. This work is not symbolic. It is necessary. A market that is not cleaned does not reopen smoothly. Cleanliness here is not aesthetic. It is preparation disguised as humility. The cleaner knows the square better than anyone who bargained within it. He knows where refuse collects, where water pools, where footsteps are most frequent. His knowledge is physical rather than verbal. He could not explain it easily, but his body remembers it precisely. This is one of the quiet competencies that medieval cities relied upon without ever praising. Some merchants remain as well, not because they expect customers, but because they have nowhere else to go that night. Not all traders lived within the walls. Not all could afford lodging. The market offered a kind of temporary belonging, a place that tolerated stillness as long as it did not ask questions. These merchants arrange themselves carefully. They choose spots that feel less exposed. They use stalls as partial shelter. They wrap themselves in cloth that once protected goods. There is no embarrassment in this. The market does not judge. It simply provides surfaces and corners. There is something gently amusing in how the marketplace becomes a shared sleeping arrangement without ever agreeing to be one. It was built for exchange, not rest, yet it adapts. Wood supports weight differently at night. Stone cools, but remains reliable. The market reveals that it is more flexible than its official purpose suggests. Children apprenticed to sellers often sleep closest to the stalls, curled where they can hear familiar sounds. Their presence is practical rather than sentimental. They are there because they are needed early and trusted late. Their sleep is light, interrupted by movements and shifts in sound, yet it is accepted as normal. Medieval childhood did not wait for ideal conditions. These young sleepers do not dream of markets as historical spaces. They dream of fatigue and morning tasks. Their bodies learn the rhythm of commerce long before their minds understand it. History will later call this training. At the time, it is simply life continuing without pause. The guard passes them without comment. The cleaner sweeps around them carefully. The merchants adjust their positions to avoid waking them. There is an unspoken agreement that these bodies belong here tonight. The market is not empty because emptiness would be inefficient. What unites these remaining figures is not status but function. Each serves continuity rather than exchange. They are responsible for what happens between days. The space between closing and opening is not accidental. It is managed by people who rarely appear in records. There is mild humor in how invisible this group remains in grand narratives. Chronicles celebrate kings and merchants, but seldom mention the individuals who ensured that the square did not decay overnight. Without them, there would be nothing to reopen. The marketplace at night becomes a study in overlooked labor. Authority remains, but it is understated. Maintenance continues, but it is quiet. Survival does not require applause. It requires attention to small details repeated endlessly. This is when the market feels most honest about itself. It stops pretending to be a center of activity and admits that it is also a place where people wait. Waiting is not glamorous, but it is foundational. A society that cannot wait calmly cannot function predictably. There is also a subtle redistribution of power here. During the day, customers dominate the space. At night, those who stay gain a different kind of control. They decide what is protected, what is ignored, what is allowed to rest. Their authority is situational and temporary, but it is real. The market teaches a quiet lesson through this shift. Value is not only created during moments of exchange, it is preserved during moments of care. The work of staying matters as much as the work of selling. As the hours pass, movement becomes rarer. The guard slows his circuit. The cleaner finishes and leaves. The merchants settle into stillness. The apprentices sleep more deeply. The square does not empty. It stabilizes. From a distance, it might look abandoned. It is not. It is simply inhabited by people whose presence does not announce itself. This is a different kind of fullness, one that does not rely on noise. If history paused long enough to listen, it might notice that this is where resilience lives, not in proclamations or prophets, but in the ability of a place to hold a few tired bodies without collapsing into chaos. The medieval marketplace after trade is over is not a ghost space. It is a holding space, a place that keeps enough life within it to ensure that morning will arrive smoothly. When dawn eventually comes, the crowd will return and overwrite this quieter population. Voices will reclaim the square, but the night will have done its work. The people who stayed will have kept the market intact, not by doing anything remarkable, but by remaining when leaving would have been easier. And that is perhaps the most understated achievement of all. Food that tastes different at night. Food at night does not try to convince anyone of anything, and this is perhaps its most honest quality, because once the marketplace has stopped performing for customers, what remains is nourishment stripped of presentation, meals designed not to impress, but to finish a day that has already decided it will not be memorable. During daylight, food carries ambition. Bread is arranged to look fuller than it is. Soup is kept warmer than necessary. Wine is poured with a gesture that suggests abundance even when there is little to spare. At night, all of this disappears. There is no audience left to persuade. The meal becomes a solution rather than a statement. Bread eaten after sunset is rarely fresh. It is bread that has survived the day. The crust is harder, the crumb is denser. It requires effort from the jaw, which is fitting, because this meal is not about pleasure. It is about endurance. Medieval people understood texture not as a flaw, but as information. Bread that resists reminds you that you are still awake. Soup at night is thinner, not because someone failed, but because water is a strategy. Stretching a pot allows more mouths to reach morning. The vegetables have given up most of their strength earlier in the day. What remains is warmth and salt and the faint memory of flavor. It is enough. It does not ask for praise. There is mild irony in how modern descriptions of medieval cuisine often focus on feasts and excess, as if people lived permanently on the edge of spectacle. Night meals contradict this fantasy entirely. They are quiet, repetitive, and modest. The same bowl used yesterday is used again. The same spoon moves at the same pace. Variety is a luxury best enjoyed when one has the energy to notice it. Wine at night is diluted, sometimes heavily, sometimes to the point where calling it wine feels generous. This is not moral restraint. It is practical arithmetic. Alcohol that dulls the senses too much interferes with rest, and rest is more valuable than intoxication. The goal is calm, not escape. Drinking watered wine also stretches supply, which matters more after dark than pride. No one boasts about strength of drink at this hour. There is nothing to prove. The night has already established its authority. What makes these meals historically interesting is not their content, but their intention. Night food exists to close the day properly. It signals that labor is finished and survival can shift into maintenance. Eating becomes a bridge between effort and sleep. These meals are often eaten standing or sitting on whatever surface is available: a crate, a low wall, the edge of a stall. Comfort is secondary to convenience. The body adjusts without complaint because it has learned that perfection is inefficient. There is also a change in pace. Daytime eating is hurried, interrupted, negotiated around customers. Night eating slows not because time is abundant, but because interruptions have ceased. Each bite feels more deliberate. Chewing becomes audible. Swallowing is noticed. Food tastes different in this context, not because ingredients change, but because attention does. Hunger late in the day is quieter, but deeper. It does not demand novelty. It appreciates reliability. A familiar flavor at night reassures more than a complex one ever could. The marketplace provides a peculiar setting for these meals. Surrounded by stalls that once displayed abundance, people now eat in partial darkness among remnants. The contrast is instructive. It reveals how little spectacle matters once the body asserts its needs. There is gentle humor in how seriously people once arranged goods for sale, only to eat their own dinner without ceremony nearby. The same hands that adjusted fruit to catch the light now tear bread without regard for symmetry. The market witnesses its own demystification. Food at night is also shared differently. There is less trading and more offering. Someone passes a piece of bread without comment. A bowl is extended rather than advertised. These gestures are not sentimental. They are efficient ways to ensure cooperation continues tomorrow. No one discusses recipes. No one critiques seasoning. Evaluation has ended for the day. The meal is successful if it does not create new problems. Satisfaction is defined by absence of discomfort rather than presence of delight. Smells shift as well. Cooking aromas fade quickly in cool air. What remains is the scent of steam, damp grain, and faint acidity. These smells do not linger. They announce that food is being consumed rather than prepared. Eating at night in the market reinforces hierarchy quietly. Apprentices eat what they are given. Merchants eat what remains. Guards eat when their circuit allows. There is no negotiation about this. It is understood without explanation. Yet there is also equality in fatigue. Everyone is tired enough to accept simplicity. Status loses some of its sharpness when the day has been long. Hunger flattens distinctions temporarily. The absence of decoration is the point. There are no garnishes, no careful plating, no attempt to record the moment. This food will not appear in manuscripts or paintings. It exists entirely to disappear. And yet this is precisely why it matters. A society that feeds itself adequately at night is a society that understands continuity. It does not rely on celebration to survive. It relies on repetition. The medieval marketplace at night reveals that history is sustained not by grand meals, but by unremarkable ones eaten consistently. Bread that is slightly stale but dependable, soup that is thin but warm, wine that is diluted but calming. There is something deeply practical about this approach to nourishment. It does not ask what food could be. It asks what food must do: keep people functioning, carry them to morning. As the last bowls are emptied and the last crumbs brushed aside, there is no applause. There is no satisfaction beyond the body easing slightly. That easing is enough. Food at night does not leave a legacy. It leaves people alive. And for the medieval marketplace, that was the only goal that mattered. In this way, the cuisine of the night teaches a quiet lesson. History is not built on feasts remembered, but on meals forgotten. the ones eaten quickly, without beauty, without witnesses, in places where no one thought the future was watching. Light was never meant to be everywhere. Light in the medieval marketplace at night was never a promise of safety or comfort, and certainly not a declaration that the city was awake and welcoming, because light was expensive, fragile, and carefully rationed, used not to conquer darkness, but to negotiate with it, just enough to keep the night from becoming inconvenient. During the day, light arrived freely and without permission. It spilled across stone and wood with no regard for intention. At night, light had to be invited, carried, fed, protected. Every flame required attention. Every lamp implied responsibility. Illumination was not a right. It was a choice. Lanterns were placed where feet moved, not where eyes might admire. Their purpose was practical and faintly impatient. They existed to prevent stumbling, not to reveal beauty. A pool of light on uneven stone was worth more than a brightly lit wall. The market understood that visibility should serve movement, not curiosity. This limited approach to lighting shaped behavior more effectively than any rule posted during the day. People stayed within illuminated paths, not because they were told to, but because it made sense. Darkness did the work of boundaries without raising its voice. There is mild irony in how modern imagination often treats medieval darkness as a flaw, something societies were desperately trying to overcome, when in reality darkness functioned as an organizing principle. It told people when to slow down, where not to linger, and which interactions were unnecessary after sunset. Light also helped distinguish bodies without inviting engagement. Faces were partially visible, enough to recognize familiarity, not enough to encourage conversation. This balance mattered. Recognition prevented confusion. Obscurity prevented conflict. The market did not need full clarity. It needed just enough certainty to keep things moving. Torches and lamps were held low, angled toward the ground. This was not aesthetic, it was efficient. Lighting the path reduced accidents. Lighting faces invited questions. The night favored the former. Shadows were not treated as threats so much as instructions. A dark corner suggested that nothing there required attention. An unlit stall indicated closure. The absence of light communicated status without explanation. Darkness was an editor, removing unnecessary details from the scene. This reliance on shadow reduced the need for enforcement. People did not wander aimlessly into places where light had withdrawn. The city did not chase them away. It simply did not invite them in. The marketplace at night thus became a lesson in restraint. Light was applied sparingly, with intention, and always with an awareness of its cost. Too much light meant too much responsibility. It revealed messes that could not be addressed until morning. It encouraged activity that could not be supported. There is something quietly amusing about how darkness accomplished what authority often struggles to achieve. It discouraged loitering. It reduced disputes. It shortened conversations. It did all of this without issuing a single command. Light also marked hierarchy subtly. Those who carried lanterns carried obligation. Guards, cleaners, and late workers bore illumination because their roles demanded movement. Others followed the light or stayed near it. The distribution of brightness mirrored the distribution of duty. This was not a city attempting to eliminate darkness. It was a city cooperating with it. Darkness absorbed what the day had no need to resolve. It softened edges. It hid imperfections. It allowed structures to rest. The marketplace reveals its intelligence most clearly here. It did not attempt to simulate daytime conditions. It accepted that night required different rules. Light was not meant to be everywhere because attention was not meant to be everywhere. Modern expectations of constant illumination misunderstand the value of selective visibility. Medieval cities knew that seeing everything creates pressure to respond to everything. Night offered relief from that burden. As lamps flickered and shadows deepened, movement slowed naturally. People adjusted their pace without instruction. Caution replaced urgency. The absence of full light encouraged awareness of surroundings, rather than confidence in speed. There is also a sensory shift that accompanies this lighting philosophy. Sounds grow more noticeable when sight recedes. Textures are felt rather than examined. The market becomes less visual and more tactile. This redistribution of perception suits the hour. The darkness also equalized appearances. Wealth was harder to display. Clothing lost detail. Objects became shapes rather than statements. The night reduced social signals to silhouettes. This simplification eased tension. Without constant visual comparison, people focused on function rather than impression. The market did not judge in the dark. It simply existed. When disputes did arise, limited light contained them. Fewer witnesses meant fewer performances. Conflicts were less likely to escalate when there was no audience to reward escalation. Darkness discouraged theater. The careful placement of light also preserved energy. Fuel burned slowly, wicks were trimmed. Nothing was wasted on unnecessary brightness. Survival depended on conservation more than visibility. From a historical perspective, this approach to light reflects a broader understanding of limits. Medieval societies accepted that resources were finite and planned behavior accordingly. Night was not a problem to solve. It was a condition to accommodate. As the hours passed, even the existing lights were extinguished gradually. Not all at once, one by one. Each flame put out signaled that a section of the market no longer required attention. The city folded itself inward. What remained was not blindness, but familiarity. People knew the space well enough to navigate it with minimal guidance. Trust in memory replaced reliance on sight. By the time full night settled, the marketplace was held together by darkness more than light. Boundaries were clear, activity was limited. Rest was possible. Light had done exactly what it was meant to do. Nothing more, nothing everywhere. And in that restraint, the medieval marketplace demonstrated a form of wisdom that modern cities often forget. Sometimes the most effective way to maintain order is not to illuminate everything, but to let darkness quietly take over the work no one wants to manage. Rules that appear after sunset. When the sun leaves the market, the written rules quietly step aside, not because they have failed, but because they are no longer the most efficient way to manage human behavior, and in their place emerges a softer system, one that does not announce itself, does not require parchment or seals, and yet proves remarkably effective at shaping how people move, pause, and decide when to disappear. During the day, order is explicit. Signs are visible, expectations are spoken aloud. Authority shows itself openly and often. People argue with rules, appeal to them, negotiate around them. Daytime law is something you can point to. Nighttime law is something you feel. After sunset, the marketplace teaches a different curriculum. It does not explain where one is allowed to go. It demonstrates it. Paths illuminated even faintly suggest permission. Areas left dark suggest disinterest. Nobody needs to forbid entry. The absence of invitation is enough. People learn quickly which routes make sense. Walking directly across the square is acceptable while lingering near closed stalls is not. Standing still too long without purpose draws attention not because someone is watching closely, but because stillness itself becomes noticeable when everything else is slowing down. There is mild irony in how effective this system is. The night imposes no penalties in advance. It simply creates conditions in which certain behaviors feel uncomfortable. Lingering feels exposed. Wandering feels unnecessary. Loitering feels like a misunderstanding of the hour. Who should be avoided becomes equally clear without being named. Familiar figures pass without concern. Unknown ones are noticed not through suspicion but through contrast. The night does not accuse, it highlights difference quietly. This form of regulation relies heavily on shared awareness. Everyone understands without discussion that nighttime behavior is not judged by the same standards as daytime activity. Loudness feels excessive. Curiosity feels misplaced. Efficiency becomes the highest virtue. The marketplace does not require anyone to enforce these norms aggressively. People enforce them on themselves. This self-regulation is not moral. It is practical. The cost of standing out at night is social friction, and friction is tiring when one is already tired. Guards play a role, but a limited one. They are less enforcers than reminders. Their presence reinforces the idea that someone is paying attention, but they rarely need to intervene. The night has already done most of the work for them. It is interesting how quickly people adapt to these unspoken expectations. A visitor who ignored them would not be punished immediately. They would simply feel out of place. That feeling is usually enough to correct behavior. The market thus becomes a classroom without a teacher. Lessons are absorbed through repetition rather than instruction. Where to walk, when to move on, how long to remain visible before becoming a question rather than a person. There is gentle humor in how sophisticated this system is compared to its simplicity. No council meeting designed it, no document preserves it. It emerges naturally from fatigue, darkness, and shared interest in ending the day without complications. These nighttime rules are flexible. They adjust to weather, crowd size, and mood. On colder nights, movement accelerates. On warmer ones, pauses are tolerated slightly longer. The rules breathe with the environment. Importantly, they also forgive. A person lingering briefly is not immediately suspect. Context matters. Carrying goods suggests purpose. Standing near light suggests necessity. The night allows explanation through posture and movement rather than speech. This reliance on body language is efficient. It reduces argument. One does not need to justify oneself verbally if one's behavior already aligns with expectations. The market at night values coherence over persuasion. Written law cannot achieve this level of subtlety. It must define boundaries sharply. Unspoken rules allow for gradation. They recognize that not all situations require the same response. The medieval marketplace depended on this adaptability. Formal authority was limited. Communication was imperfect. Self-regulation filled the gap not through ideology, but through habit. Nighttime norms also protected privacy. People could pass without scrutiny if they behaved appropriately. Not everyone wished to be noticed after dark. The market respected that desire by offering anonymity in exchange for restraint. This balance between visibility and discretion reduced conflict. Without the pressure to assert identity constantly, interactions remained minimal. Minimal interaction meant fewer misunderstandings. There is something deeply pragmatic about this arrangement. It does not aim to perfect behavior. It aims to prevent escalation. The goal is not justice. It is quiet. As hours pass, the rules become even simpler. Move if you must. Stop if you should. Leave when finished. These instructions are never spoken. They are absorbed through the environment. By the time night deepens, most people have learned what the market expects of them. Those who have not usually leave on their own, not because they are forced, but because staying no longer feels correct. The market thus teaches an essential lesson about social order. Control does not always require force. Often it requires conditions that make cooperation the easiest option. In this way, the medieval marketplace after sunset becomes an example of collective intelligence. Individuals adjust their behavior not out of fear, but out of alignment with shared rhythms. When morning comes, written rules will resume their prominence. Signs will matter again. Authority will speak more loudly. But the night will have already proven something important. People are capable of regulating themselves when given clear but gentle signals. Darkness, limited light, and shared fatigue provided those signals more effectively than any proclamation. The market does not boast about this achievement. It does not record it. It simply repeats it night after night, teaching generations how to coexist quietly when the day is done. And perhaps that is its most understated success. Not that it enforced rules, but that it made following them feel natural, even restful, as the city prepared itself once again to begin anew. Money that sleeps too. Money does not vanish when the market closes. It simply lowers its voice because the medieval night does not abolish exchange so much as it asks it to rest, to fold itself away, like a tool that has done enough work for one day and would cause more trouble than benefit if used carelessly after dark. Coins remain present in the way heavy objects do when set down deliberately. Pouches are tied more tightly. Belts are adjusted. Hands that were quick all afternoon become cautious and still. This is not fear. It is recognition. Night is not the right hour for arithmetic that requires enthusiasm. During the day, money is energetic. It moves often and loudly. It invites comparison. It encourages optimism. After sunset, money becomes reflective. It prefers to be counted once more and then left alone. A coin spent at night feels heavier than the same coin spent at noon, not because its value has changed, but because the margin for correction has narrowed. Transactions do not stop entirely, but they thin dramatically. What remains are exchanges that feel necessary rather than opportunistic. A payment to settle a small obligation, a coin offered to secure tomorrow's supply. These acts are quiet and precise. No one seeks advantage. Everyone seeks closure. There is mild humor in how ambition retreats with the light. The same merchant who debated fiercely over fractions of value earlier now accepts a round number without complaint. The night rewards simplicity. Complication at this hour feels suspiciously like self-sabotage. Wallets are closed not merely to protect contents, but to signal intention. A closed pouch is a statement. It says that negotiation has ended for the day. It communicates boundaries without confrontation. Those who ignore this signal reveal more about themselves than they intend. Credit behaves differently after dark. Debts are not discussed loudly, they are remembered. Names are recalled. Promises are weighed. Memory replaces documentation. A person who owes money is not pursued aggressively. They are simply noted. The night has a long memory. This remembering is a form of economy rarely celebrated. It does not expand markets. It maintains them. Trust accumulates slowly when transactions pause. The absence of pressure allows reputations to settle. The medieval marketplace relied heavily on this tired trust. People knew each other well enough to delay settlement without panic. The expectation of tomorrow was strong enough to support restraint tonight. This confidence was not naive. It was built from repetition. Nighttime economics also reduces risk. Fewer exchanges mean fewer mistakes. Counting errors are more likely when eyes are strained and light is poor. The market compensates by choosing inactivity over precision. This is not inefficiency. It is prudence. There is an understated intelligence in how money accepts these limits. No authority commands it to rest. The environment encourages it. Darkness, fatigue, and social expectation combine to slow circulation naturally. This slowing benefits everyone. Disputes decrease. Accusations lose momentum. The market avoids conflicts that would require daylight to resolve. By sleeping, money protects relationships. It is tempting to imagine that economic life thrives on constant motion. Medieval nights suggest the opposite. Stability depends on intervals of stillness. Wealth that never pauses exhausts the people managing it. The quiet of coins at night also changes how value is perceived. Without the constant exchange of currency, goods regain their physical presence. Bread is bread again, not a price. Tools are weight and texture rather than numbers. The abstraction of value relaxes. This return to material reality is grounding. It reminds people that money is a means rather than an end. At night, survival takes precedence over profit. The hierarchy is clear and unchallenged. There is also a subtle redistribution of attention. During the day, wealth attracts notice. At night, behavior does. A person who continues to spend freely appears careless rather than powerful. Restraint becomes a sign of competence. Nighttime economic norms also protect the vulnerable. Reduced transactions limit exploitation. The tired are less likely to be persuaded into unfavorable deals when the culture discourages bargaining. The market looks after itself by slowing down. One might expect such quiet to feel restrictive. Instead, it feels relieving. The pressure to decide eases. Choices can wait. Tomorrow exists. Debts remembered rather than demanded illustrate a social contract rooted in patience. Payment delayed is not payment denied. It is acknowledgement that time matters as much as money. This patience does not imply leniency forever. The memory persists. The morning will bring clarity. The night simply refuses to rush judgment. In this sense, the economy of the night is conservative, in the best way. It preserves resources, relationships, and energy. It does not chase growth. It maintains continuity. As the square settles, coins remain where they are. Pouches rest against bodies. Tallies are postponed. The market breathes evenly. From a historical perspective, these pauses are invisible yet essential. Records show transactions. They do not show restraint, they celebrate movement, not stillness. Yet it is in these silent hours that the economic system demonstrates its resilience. By sleeping, money avoids mistakes that could unravel trust built over years. The medieval marketplace did not idolize wealth. It managed it. And management included knowing when to stop. As night deepens, the few remaining exchanges conclude without ceremony. Coins change hands softly, pouches close. The sound of money fades into the background where it belongs. What remains is not poverty or abundance, but equilibrium. A shared understanding that enough has been done for one day. The economy has not disappeared. It has simply agreed to wait. And in that agreement lies a quiet strength, one that carried medieval cities forward, not through relentless activity, but through the wisdom of letting even money sleep when the hour demanded it. Weather, smell, and the reality of stone. When the crowd finally thins enough to stop pretending it was holding the city together, the marketplace discovers what it has been resting on all day, and what it finds is not prosperity or momentum, but weather, smell, and stone. Three elements that were always present, yet politely ignored while voices and movement did the work of distraction. The first sensation to announce itself is usually smell, because scent does not require permission to travel and never waits for ceremony, and without bodies pressing close enough to confuse it, the market's refuse becomes legible, not as something shocking or grotesque, but as evidence of honest use. Vegetable trimmings that seemed insignificant at noon now release their sweetness and decay without apology. Straw dampened by the day's footsteps gives off an earthy note that reminds anyone paying attention that animals were here and will be again. Nothing smells dramatic. It smells used. There is mild irony in how modern imagination associates medieval cities with unbearable filth, when in reality the night simply removes the perfume of distraction. What remains is not an exaggeration of dirt, but an accurate account of labor. The smell of waste is the smell of transactions completed. It is what commerce leaves behind when it has finished speaking. Wind follows quickly. During the day, the market is sheltered by its own density. Bodies absorb drafts. Movement breaks air into manageable currents. At night, with gaps opening between structures and people, the wind behaves honestly. It moves where it wants. It slips between stalls and along walls, testing corners like a curious visitor with no interest in buying anything. This wind is not theatrical. It does not howl unless invited by architecture. It simply reminds everyone that warmth was never guaranteed. Cloaks are adjusted, shoulders hunch slightly. The city reveals that comfort was always borrowed from proximity. Stone then asserts itself not loudly, but persistently. Pavement that felt solid during the day now feels unyielding. Sitting surfaces cool quickly. Standing still becomes a negotiation with stiffness. Stone does not care how successful the market was. It only registers temperature and pressure. There is something almost humorous in how quickly the city drops its performance of abundance once the audience leaves. The same square that appeared vibrant hours earlier now admits that it is hard, drafty, and unforgiving. This is not a failure. It is a reset. Prosperity in daylight is partly an illusion created by density. People close together generate warmth, noise, and energy that suggests comfort even when resources are thin. At night, when that density dissolves, the city stops acting and starts existing. Smells become layered rather than overwhelming. The sharpness of waste mingles with damp stone and old wood. There is no attempt to mask this combination. The night accepts complexity without hierarchy. Everything is allowed to be present at once. The wind rearranges these smells gently. It carries them along predictable paths, down alleys, across open squares, against walls that have absorbed centuries of weather. The city breathes differently, without crowds compressing it. Stone responds by holding cold. It releases heat reluctantly, if at all. This is when people realize how much daytime warmth was borrowed from the sun and from each other. At night, stone insists on its own schedule. These physical realities do more to regulate behavior than any ordinance. People move faster not because they are told to, but because lingering feels uncomfortable. The environment encourages efficiency through sensation rather than instruction. There is quiet intelligence in this arrangement. The city does not need to announce that it is time to leave. It simply becomes less accommodating. The lesson is subtle but effective. The marketplace at this hour feels stripped of narrative. It is no longer a place of stories or ambitions. It is a surface, a channel for wind, a container for smell, a collection of materials responding to night. There is gentle humor in how seriously the daytime market takes itself compared to this version. All that talk of prices and quality and reputation dissolves when a cold gust reminds everyone that none of it insulates particularly well. People who remain adjust quickly. They sit on folded cloth rather than stone. They choose corners that block wind. They accept the smells without comment. Complaining would require energy better saved for morning. This is also when the market reveals its age. Stone that felt smooth earlier now feels uneven. Gaps between paving become more noticeable. The surface tells a longer story when the crowd stops narrating over it. Weather exposes the limits of maintenance. Sweeping improves appearance but does not eliminate odor. Repair smooths edges but does not change temperature. The night reminds everyone that control is partial at best. There is no attempt to dramatize this exposure. No one announces that the city has stopped pretending. It simply happens. The market sheds its daytime costume without ceremony. In this honesty, there is relief. Without the pressure to perform prosperity, the city can rest. It does not need to convince anyone of its importance. It only needs to endure until morning. The people present understand this intuitively. They lower expectations. They accept discomfort as temporary. The night is not a critique. It is a condition. From a historical distance, this moment matters because it reveals what medieval urban life was built upon when spectacle faded. Stone did not change. Weather did not negotiate. Smell did not flatter. And yet cities persisted. The marketplace teaches a quiet lesson here. Prosperity is not the absence of hardship. It is the ability to resume after acknowledging it. Night forces acknowledgement. As the hours pass, senses adapt, smells fade into background. Wind becomes predictable, stone becomes familiar, discomfort stabilizes into something manageable. The body learns what the environment expects of it. By the time full night settles, the city feels less harsh than it did at dusk. Not because it improved, but because adjustment occurred. This adaptability is one of the uncelebrated strengths of medieval life. The market no longer claims to be vibrant. It does not need to. It claims only to be functional. And function at night means surviving weather, tolerating smell, and accepting stone as it is. When morning eventually returns, the crowd will once again soften these realities. Smells will be masked, wind will be broken, stone will feel less severe under movement. Prosperity will resume its performance, but the night will have done its work. It will have reminded the city of its foundations, not as an accusation, but as a fact. This is the moment when the marketplace stops telling stories about itself and allows the materials to speak. They say little, but what they say is reliable. They say that beneath trade and noise, the city is still weather, smell, and stone, and that nothing built on anything else lasts very long. The market as a place to sleep, not trade. At a certain hour, the marketplace stops pretending that it is a destination and becomes what it always was underneath the noise, a surface large enough to pause upon, because when night settles fully, movement loses its hierarchy, and the difference between here and elsewhere grows surprisingly small. Some people sleep in the market not because they have failed to find somewhere better, but because the calculation changes after dark. Distance feels longer. Doors feel heavier. Streets look the same no matter where they lead. The effort required to relocate outweighs the benefit of arrival. In that equation, the market becomes acceptable. This choice is practical rather than desperate. The ground is hard everywhere. The air is cold everywhere. The night does not reward relocation with comfort. It rewards stillness with conservation. Those who remain in the square understand this instinctively. The market offers neutrality. It belongs to no household and demands no explanation. A person resting there is not visiting and not trespassing. They are simply present. This ambiguity is useful. It reduces obligation. No host must be thanked. No door must be negotiated. There is mild irony in how a space designed entirely for exchange becomes, at night, one of the least transactional places in the city. No bargaining occurs. No prices are quoted. Presence alone is sufficient justification. People arrange themselves carefully, not for elegance, but for efficiency. A folded cloth becomes a pillow. A crate becomes a backrest. A stall wall becomes a windbreak. The market provides shapes rather than comforts, and people adapt accordingly. Sleep here is light. It is not the kind that erases awareness. It is the kind that pauses it. Bodies remain tuned to sound. Movement registers immediately. Rest is conditional and therefore cautious. Children apprenticed to merchants sleep closest to familiar structures. Their trust lies in routine. They know which boards creak and which ropes sway. Familiarity replaces softness. Travelers sleep farther from the center, near edges where departure is easier at dawn. They choose spots that allow quick re-entry into motion. The market serves as an overnight bracket between journeys. There is no ceremony to this arrangement. No one announces that the square has become a sleeping place. It simply happens because the night permits it and because no better alternative asserts itself strongly enough. This neutrality is one of the market's quiet strengths. During the day, it sorts people by role: buyer, seller, guard, apprentice. At night, it flattens these distinctions. Everyone rests in similar postures. Fatigue equalizes. The guards tolerate this without enthusiasm or resistance. Sleeping bodies are not problems if they remain still. The goal is not to clear the square, but to prevent disruption. Resting quietly aligns with that goal. There is gentle humor in how little concern is given to appearances now. Clothing is loosened, shoes are removed or left half on. Dignity is postponed until morning. The market does not judge this lapse, it enables it. Sleep at the market is not romantic. It is functional. It allows people to remain close to work. It reduces risk associated with night travel. It preserves energy for morning labor. The space itself adjusts, sounds dampen, movement becomes infrequent. The square holds bodies without engaging them. It becomes a container rather than a stage. This transformation reveals something important about medieval urban life. Public space was not rigidly defined by purpose. It was elastic. A place of trade could become a place of rest without contradiction. Neutral space is valuable precisely because it does not insist on meaning. The market at night does not demand participation. It allows withdrawal without requiring departure. People sleep knowing that nothing is expected of them for several hours. This absence of demand is rare during the day. At night, it becomes possible. The stone beneath them remains cold. The air remains uneven. Comfort is minimal. Yet this minimalism carries reassurance. There are no surprises promised. What you feel now is what you will feel until dawn. From a historical perspective, this is not a footnote. It is a mechanism of endurance. Cities that allow their inhabitants to pause without explanation reduce friction. They lower the cost of simply existing. The market as sleeping space also absorbs people who might otherwise wander. It concentrates rest. It simplifies monitoring. It prevents unnecessary movement. Neutrality becomes order. There is no narrative attached to this rest. No memory is meant to persist. The sleepers do not imagine themselves as part of anything larger. They imagine morning. As hours pass, breathing synchronizes loosely. The square settles into a low rhythm. The market holds its occupants without interaction. When dawn approaches, bodies will rise gradually. No signal will announce the transition. People will stretch, gather belongings, re-inhabit roles. The neutrality will dissolve quietly. But for these hours, the market has performed a different function entirely. It has provided permission to stop. In doing so, it reveals an understated wisdom. A society that builds spaces capable of becoming neutral when needed builds resilience without advertising it. The medieval marketplace at night is not empty and not active. It is suspended. And in that suspension, people recover enough to continue. Trade will return. Noise will reclaim the square. Roles will sharpen again. But the night will have fulfilled its purpose. It will have allowed the market to be nothing in particular for a while, and sometimes that is exactly what keeps everything else going. What didn't happen that night? Nothing dramatic happened that night, and this absence deserves more attention than any spectacle ever could, because when a medieval marketplace passes from dusk to deep night without incident, without interruption, without transformation into legend, it reveals a kind of success that history rarely pauses to acknowledge. There was no riot, no sudden swell of voices, no surge of bodies colliding under competing intentions. The square did not erupt into chaos, even though it easily could have. People were tired, resources were limited, darkness reduced visibility. If disorder were waiting just beneath the surface of medieval life, this would have been the hour for it to appear. It did not. There was no miracle either, no unexpected generosity that rewrote social boundaries, no sudden reversal of fortune. Bread did not multiply. Coin did not reappear in empty purses. The night did not intervene. It simply passed. And perhaps most telling of all, there was no defining moment, no decision that altered the future, no conversation later quoted, no act that demanded to be remembered. The night did not ask to be archived. This is precisely what makes it important. History often trains its gaze on disruption. It waits for breaks in pattern, for moments when something fails or explodes or transforms so visibly that it demands narration. But the medieval marketplace survived not because it was constantly corrected by drama, but because most nights required no correction at all. The absence of violence is not an accident. It is the result of countless small adjustments made earlier in the evening. Prices softened, voices lowered, movement slowed, light was rationed, rules shifted from written to instinctive. Each of these choices removed friction. By the time full night arrived, there was nothing left to ignite. The absence of miracles is equally instructive. Medieval people did not expect the night to solve their problems. They expected it to contain them. Hope was placed in mourning, not in sudden intervention. This expectation moderated behavior. People planned accordingly. There is gentle irony in how modern narratives often insist that something must always be happening, as if stillness were a failure of imagination. The medieval night resists this demand entirely. It demonstrates that nothing happening can be an achievement. The market does not collapse when nothing happens. It stabilizes. It rests within boundaries that have already been tested. The systems that govern it do not require constant reinforcement. They function through repetition. What did not happen that night includes theft on a scale worth mentioning. Not because theft never occurred, but because the environment discouraged it. Darkness limited opportunity. Familiarity increased recognition. Fatigue reduced appetite for risk. The cost outweighed the gain. What did not happen also includes confrontation. Disagreements resolved themselves earlier or were postponed. The night did not reward argument. Without an audience, conflict lost momentum. What did not happen includes panic. There was no collective anxiety that demanded action. No rumor spread fast enough to matter. Information moved slowly at night, which allowed it to dissipate rather than amplify. The absence of urgency shaped time itself. Minutes passed without being measured. Hours folded into one another. The night did not announce progress. It simply endured. There is something almost subversive about this endurance. In a world often portrayed as unstable and harsh, the quiet competence of an uneventful night challenges expectation. It suggests that medieval urban life was not constantly teetering on the edge of collapse. This does not mean life was easy. It means it was managed. The market that night functioned precisely because nothing demanded intervention. Its structures absorbed pressure. Its rhythms absorbed fatigue. Its people trusted that morning would arrive without needing to be forced. There is understated humor in how anticlimactic this is. No lesson arrives wrapped in drama, no moral announces itself. The night simply proves that systems built for everyday use do not need extraordinary reinforcement to persist. The lack of a defining moment also protected memory. When nothing extraordinary happens, people do not reinterpret events afterward. They move on. The night does not become myth. This is important because myth can distort expectation. A society that remembers only crises begins to anticipate them everywhere. The medieval marketplace remembered mostly routine, which encouraged confidence rather than fear. By not producing a story, the night preserved the conditions that allowed stories to be written later. Stability creates narrative potential by postponing disruption. From a historical distance, it is tempting to dismiss this night as irrelevant. No records mention it. No chronicles pause here. And yet the survival of cities depended far more on nights like this than on nights of upheaval. The fact that nothing happened meant that repairs were unnecessary. Relationships remained intact. Trust was neither tested nor broken. Energy was conserved. This conservation is crucial. Societies exhaust themselves not only through disaster, but through constant anticipation of disaster. The medieval night did not indulge that anticipation. It assumed normality until proven otherwise. The marketplace thus demonstrates a quiet principle. Order is not maintained through constant assertion, but through conditions that make disruption unlikely and unrewarding. As dawn approached, nothing needed to be repaired. Nothing needed to be explained. The market reopened not as a recovery, but as a continuation. This continuity is the real event of the night. What did not happen allowed what would happen tomorrow to proceed smoothly. Trade resumed, voices returned, light expanded. None of this required explanation because nothing had interrupted it. The night passed without claiming significance, and that refusal is its significance. History tends to overlook such nights because they do not flatter its appetite for drama. But if history were honest, it would admit that its grand arcs are built almost entirely on nights that did not demand attention. The medieval marketplace that night did not change the world. It kept it going. And sometimes that is the most consequential act of all. A marketplace that closed, so tomorrow could open. The medieval marketplace did not close because it wished to retreat from history, and it certainly did not sleep. So that future centuries might find symbolism in its silence, it closed because wood, stone, bodies, and habits all required the same thing at the same hour. A pause long enough for morning to remain possible. There is a persistent temptation to imagine that the past was driven forward by moments of intensity, by days that burned brightly enough to pull everything else behind them. But the market at night offers a quieter explanation, one that relies not on momentum, but on restraint, not on spectacle, but on repetition, so ordinary that it rarely attracts attention. When the final stall was secured and the last lantern dimmed, nothing meaningful ended. Instead, something essential was protected. The ability to reopen without hesitation depended entirely on the willingness to stop without drama. Closure was not an interruption, it was maintenance. The marketplace understood something that many societies forget when they become enamored with constant activity. Exhaustion does not produce continuity. Rest does. The market did not test its limits each night. It respected them. Closing time was not enforced with urgency. It emerged naturally as people reached the edge of what they could reasonably give. Goods were put away not with ceremony but with familiarity. Hands repeated gestures learned over years. This familiarity mattered more than discipline. Habit carried the system forward when enthusiasm ran out. There is mild irony in how little ambition appears at this hour. No one stands in the square imagining a better version of tomorrow. No grand plans are drafted. The goal is narrower and therefore more achievable. Return, be here again. Continue. This is how durable systems behave. They aim for return rather than triumph. They define success as reappearance rather than transformation. The market slept because it had learned the value of limits. Light withdrew, sound softened, movement slowed. None of this required explanation. Everyone present had understood that tomorrow depended on tonight ending cleanly. The routines that enabled this ending were unremarkable and therefore powerful. Stalls were closed the same way they had been closed hundreds of times before. Paths were walked without deviation. Rest was taken where it made sense rather than where it looked appropriate. These repetitions built reliability. Reliability built trust. Trust allowed people to disperse without anxiety. Anxiety would have kept them awake. Wakefulness would have disrupted morning. Sustainable societies rarely announce their sustainability. They demonstrate it quietly through behaviors that repeat without resistance. The medieval marketplace did not glorify its ability to close. It simply did so. There is a gentle humor in how anticlimactic this conclusion feels. After hours of trade, negotiation, movement, and noise, the final act is rest. Not reflection, not celebration. Rest. Modern narratives often struggle with endings like this because they do not feel conclusive. Nothing is resolved, nothing is declared finished, and yet everything necessary has been accomplished. The market did not require a memorable ending. It required a reliable one. Closing time was not about withdrawing value, it was about preserving it. Goods left unsold were not failures. They were inventory. Energy conserved was not laziness. It was investment. Habit played a central role here. Habits reduce decision-making. They prevent fatigue from becoming chaos. When people know what happens next, they do not panic when activity slows. The marketplace had no need to convince anyone that it would return. Its very structure depended on the expectation of repetition. Everyone acted accordingly. There is something deeply stabilizing about this confidence. A place that expects to exist tomorrow behaves differently than one constantly proving its relevance. The night offered proof not through reassurance but through silence. Silence indicated that nothing needed urgent attention. That absence of demand was the clearest signal of health. As hours passed, bodies rested. Stone cooled. Air settled. The city folded inward. This folding was not retreat. It was preparation. When dawn eventually approached, it did not arrive as rescue. It arrived as confirmation. The market had held itself together well enough to receive light again. Morning would bring voices, bargaining, and motion, but none of that would feel possible without the quiet interval that preceded it. Activity requires rest, in the same way breath requires pause. The marketplace did not imagine itself as history's stage. It imagined itself as tomorrow's workplace. This perspective shaped every choice it made after sunset. Sustainable societies are rarely built on peaks. They are built on predictable closures, on knowing when to stop, on trusting that stopping does not mean ending. The medieval market slept because it needed to wake. It rested because repetition demanded it. It closed not to mark significance, but to preserve normality. And normality, repeated often enough, becomes endurance. As the final hours of night passed, nothing called for attention. That was the achievement. The market did not demand to be remembered. It demanded only to continue. When people returned the next morning, they did not speak of the night. They did not need to. The smoothness of reopening was evidence enough that the system had worked. History rarely records such successes because they do not announce themselves. They simply allow everything else to proceed. The medieval marketplace that closed so tomorrow could open teaches a final quiet lesson. Continuity is not built by dramatic nights. It is built by nights calm enough to forget. And in that forgetting, societies survive.